Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. It's 12:30, which means that we are live, as we are every single weekday, Monday to Friday, 12:30. It's the Acsom Bulletin. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm joined by James McKenzie. We're going to be talking, James, about all things Celtic. We are in the midst of a transfer window, and good reports, credible reports, have emerged over the last 24 hours in relation to our intentions within that window. And I say that because when it comes to transfer window season, it can be silly season, James. We try to cover as much credible information as possible, but if you covered every target, you could probably spend every day talking about potential targets. And these rumours are kind of like cooked up by agents and media outlets trying to get clicks, etc., etc. But in the last 24 hours, we've got some information, and it's positive, surely.
Yeah, I think we all know how reliable Stephen McGowan is. He's been probably, as far as Celtic goes, the most reliable journalist for information on Celtic throughout the entire process, getting Ange Postecoglou, and then throughout the 2-week process before Brendan Rodgers was officially announced, he was there every step of the way. And along with signings as well, he's always been bang on. It's usually easy to sort of sniff out if a sort of transfer story is rubbish or not. Like Ange goes to Spurs, all of a sudden Kyogo, Carter Vickers, Jota Hatate, James McCarthy, Albion Ayeti are all linked with Spurs. Every single Celtic player under the sun is getting linked over there. Jota goes to Saudi, Rio Hatate is now getting linked. It's quite easy to sniff out when a transfer story is true or not, and we've had a lot of them come up. We've had one player named, I think it's Luis Palma is his name. He's playing over in the Greek league. I knew I was familiar with the name. He was linked with Rangers early on the window, actually, as their Ryan Kent replacement. I think they opted to go for Sima from Brighton on loan. But he seems to have a good goals to game record over there. He could be a player that could fit in a problem area in the Celtic squad. Fans have been crying out for more options in the wings. There's a couple more positions as well that have been earmarked in that Steve McGowan article that I'm sure we'll get onto later on in the show. I've been talking about those positions for ages on Acsom. They've been earmarked as positions we have to improve for so long, and we might be able to finally do it.
Yeah, you're right. And you know this, James, every nuance of Celtic is discussed on a Celtic State of Mind, be that a new jersey, a new signing, how well, how bad we've performed, the change in management, everything will be discussed on this show at some point. And I guess what happens is you tend to give your opinion based on what you're seeing every single day, obviously. But we've all had views on what we should be bringing into the club. The quality of signing that we need to bring into the club, the amount of players we should be bringing in. But what I'm going to say is, and we're going to get onto some of the other points that you've covered in more detail on the blog as well. But what I will say is the reports have come in from Steve McGowan. They have been followed up by Anthony Joseph, two guys who I think are more than credible sources and very, very good guys as well. I've got to say, with every deal I've ever had with them, they are saying that Celtic are still bringing in, from now till the window shuts, 3 or 4 new players. Now, let's say we get the 4, right? And we'll talk about individual numbers and positions, etc. If we get the 4, James, that means that we have signed 10 players in a transfer window. Now, see when Brendan Rodgers came in, did you see it as a rebuild? He's inherited a treble-winning side, and by the end of window number 1, we've signed 10 players. Does that surprise you a wee bit?
Well, I didn't expect Jota to go to Saudi Arabia for, 29 million euros, 25 million pounds. I didn't expect Starfelt to move over to the Spanish league. These were a couple of players that we thought would have had a few more years at Celtic. I mean, we only permanently signed Jota last summer. He's technically only really been a Celtic-owned player for about a year. And I usually think if Celtic are going to pay 6 million, you can probably get about 2 or 3 years out of the player before they move on. We've seen that with a lot of signings that have left for big money over recent years. Van Dijk was here for about 2 or 3 seasons before he eventually moved on. But when money like that comes in, you can't not turn it down. And I think a lot of people have been assuming that £25 million is going to go straight into the transfer budget. And it's not Football Manager, it's not career mode on FIFA. There's a lot more things that Celtic need to consider with that £25 million. You can't forget there was a pandemic about 2 or 3 years ago, which had a massive financial hit in the club. So that would lead to a bit less activity. But seems like we're going to be spending the money. We've got 11 days left of the window, or 10 days now maybe. We've not got long, is the point I'm trying to make, to try and get all these signings done. And you would hope Celtic would have been looking, if these positions were problem areas, you would have hoped Celtic would have been looking at players for these positions from the very start of the window. We know that Ange would plan 2 to 3 windows ahead. So you'd hope that Celtic would have targets there already lined up, so there's no need to really rush things. And I hope we can get a few of these positions locked in and done by the end of the transfer window.
You think back to that time whereby there was a recruitment meeting, and the minutes of that meeting ended up in a bin somewhere in Lennoxtown. They were pulled out of that bin, photographed, and within seconds, everybody knew who Celtic were looking at, discussing who was at the meeting, etc.
I can't remember if my mind is completely going blank as far as that recruitment sheet goes, but I have a feeling Reece James, who has won the Champions League with Chelsea and is an England international now, he was on that list when he was on loan at Wigan. I might be talking absolute rubbish, but I seem to remember Reece James being on that. I think Joe Aribo, when he was at Charlton, was on that list as well. So was Ivan Toney.
He was. Yeah, he was. We did an article on it on Acsom. I'd need to dig it out. But I do remember Scott McTominay was on it as well, actually. But see, when you looked at that sheet, it gave you the idea that obviously for every position we had long lists and short lists of players from all over the globe. You know, Ange Postecoglou came into the club, and then we widened our horizons into other markets that we hadn't tapped into. Certainly the Japanese market, we hadn't looked at that since Nakamura and Kukai Mizuno had been at the club. And I always say that, I use that as a bit of a criticism, actually, because I felt, you know, that during that period, James, Celtic could have had some, you know, world-class players, but we didn't tap back into the market after the 2 that I mentioned left the club, until, of course, Kyogo came in. And then there was an influx of Japanese players, most of whom have done pretty well, and I'm sure a few of them will be mentioned in today's bulletin. But yeah, you're right. There's going to be a group of goalies. There's going to be a group of left-backs that, you know, we are looking at, we've scouted, we have all the data, and then it's a case of a number of different moving parts at that stage. Do they fit into the system? Are they of the right character? Everything has to be considered before we actually spend some of this money that we know that we have. And obviously we have been speaking over the last couple of weeks about the fact that when a club sells a player for such a lofty fee, then, you know, any kind of business they do will be affected, sometimes adversely, because you could have, let's say that we've always been in the mix for these 4 players that we're trying to close down on. The reason that we've not signed them, James, might be that the clubs, you know, accumulatively over the 4 players are maybe asking for an extra 10 million quid because they know we've got money in the bank. So a 5 million player becomes an 8 million player. I mean, that is just football. That's normal, isn't it? And it could be that, you know, it whittles it down. It's not been inactivity by Celtic. It's just made our job a wee bit harder.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you leave your work till later in the window as well. Clubs start to get word that Celtic are desperate for a goalkeeper. Celtic are desperate for a left back. You saw that Manchester United a few years ago. They panicked until the end of the transfer window and paid 80 million for Harry Maguire because he was the only real centre back they could go for. And teams, they will be aware that Celtic have just had big money for Jota. They've been in the Champions League the last sort of few years. There is money to try and rinse out of Celtic, and they'll be trying to push us for every single penny they can. Because even across football, apart from the Premier League and the Saudi League, there's not really much money in football either. So every team will be trying to rinse every single penny they can out of any club that comes in for their star players, because they need to start recognising the value that are in our players. I've seen time and time again over the years in Scotland, there was players that we could have got far more money from, but because it's a Scottish league, we don't get the money. We could have got far more than 25 million for Kieran Tierney. Even Virgil van Dijk, we could have got far more for him. I don't think he improved that much at Southampton when he left Celtic. He was still the same quality of player that we knew he was, but teams will be trying to rinse us for as much cash as they possibly can, and I don't know if leaving things late will perhaps come back to bite us.
The Van Dijk one's the one that I always go back to because, yeah, it seems obvious, when you look at what he went on to do, James, with Liverpool and the transfer fee involved there, etc. But it was obvious to us as Celtic fans watching him. Yeah, I know we did get another 8 million on top, I think, of the 12. So we eventually did get 20 million with the kind of add-ons and all that kind of stuff. But you're right, we're in that situation. And by the way, if we do bring in 3 or 4, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of who we should be bringing in, which positions that we should be filling. The big name, of course, and I'm going to bring it up here because Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. I see what you did there. Lewis Palma is one I know of. That's in response to Paddy asking. Paddy Lavery, that is. Lovely photo, Paddy. Congratulations again on the birth of your first grandchild. I think it's your first grandchild, but I hope everybody is healthy in the family and enjoying the arrival. Any news on who the new signings are? Well, we have had one name, and we'll talk about him in a wee bit more detail as well. So it's Lewis Palma. As you say, he may be familiar by name because he was in the headlines in Scottish media earlier on in the window. He's 23 years of age, left winger. I was just looking at that. A lot of the players we bring in, James, adaptable and versatile insofar as they can play a number of positions. And I know the Japanese players have got that in abundance. Left winger, it seems to be, is his position, his chosen position. And as you said earlier on, he's playing his football in Greece for Aris Salonika. He's a Honduran international. And, this would put to bed a couple of things. It's a £3.5 million fee that has been quoted, James. I think the reported fee was slightly lower, actually, when there was interest from Rangers earlier in the window. And I guess that when you're looking about some of the targets that we've seen their names arise over the last few weeks, Daniel Podence was one that I like to look of, Wolves, but then you're looking at how do you make that work? Because it's not just the transfer fee, is it? When you're bringing a player in from Wolves, the other one being Ryan Fraser, obviously. There's an unworkable situation there between him and Eddie Howe at Newcastle. He was linked. And what followed those links, so James, were comments from Brendan Rodgers, who knows that market better than anybody else at Celtic. And he was talking about how difficult it is to do a deal involving a player from the EPL. Lo and behold, it looks as though we're looking elsewhere. Is this Jota's replacement? Is this actually Jota's replacement in your eyes?
It's probably the closest thing we'll get to it. As we've mentioned time and time again on the show, Celtic can't replace Jota. Celtic can't go out and spend 20 million on a player. But what we can do is buy a player who could potentially become as good or better than Jota. That's the way Celtic's functioned for years now. And Luis Palma could be the latest player to add to that list of players that Celtic will buy and then sell in a few years for far more money. I don't think he's playing for one of the better sides in the Greek League. I'm not too familiar with, what was the team? Is it Aris Salonika that he's playing for? Mm-hmm. I'm not too familiar with them, but I've seen his goals to game ratio, his goal contribution to game ratio, and it looks pretty good. For a team that's one of the lesser sides in the league, it doesn't look too bad. Daniel Podence obviously would have been the preferred signing for everybody, given that he's been playing at a higher level and things like that. He would have been playing the Champions League for Olympiacos, I'm certain of that. But the wages are always going to be a stumbling block when you're shopping in the Premier League. I think you see far more of these players of a similar profile in the Premier League going to leagues like Turkey or going to leagues like Saudi Arabia or some of these leagues outside of Europe that have far more money than some of the leagues inside it, just because that's where they can afford the wages. The players has had the inflated Premier League wages. Now they need to keep chasing that cash, and sadly we can't give them that at Celtic, I'm afraid. So that's pricing us out. I wanted us to shop in the Premier League in some of these sort of lower clubs. I said when Brendan first came in, I thought he was going to do that because that's the market that he knows best. But the market that Celtic know best and the market that Mark Law knows best is all of these more shrewd markets, and that's where you're going to get the better deals. That's where Celtic's biggest sales have come from, some of these markets that you wouldn't expect. Celtic haven't bought a player from the Premier League and then sold them in a few years for loads more money. It's impossible to do. So it seems like we're reverting back to old ways, but that's not always a bad thing. The old ways have served Celtic time and time again.
No, they have. And I've got to admit, right, and I've said this many times on Acsom, my sole focus when it comes to football is Celtic and therefore it's Scottish football. You do your research on teams that you might face in Europe. You do your research on players that you're linked with, and you become familiar with those individuals. But I'm not a massive follower. I seen you yesterday. You were watching. What were you watching? What league were you watching yesterday, James? You were tuning in online to some. Was it League One?
It was the Bundesliga. I had on
Bundesliga, right. Right, so you're watching the Bundesliga. I know people are into the Spanish football, and David Slight, who is a contributor to Acsom from time to time, he loves his German football, he loves his French football. Loads of people love their English football. I'm not so keen, and I don't know if it's because I don't have the time, actually, because back in the day, reading World Soccer and all the football mags, I had a much better knowledge of different leagues around Europe, certainly not so much the world, but Europe, and that's not where I am. But I think that maybe there was a time where there was maybe a situation where familiarity of a player made me more confident in the signing. So if you did sign someone
that's still
from
the case nowadays,
yeah,
I think if I've heard of a player, instantly the excitement levels go up. I've mentioned loads in the podcast. A certain buzzwords he hit where it would be, oh, he's a young Argentinian player, a young player from the Brazilian league. You instantly get more excited, and there's a reason I'd be more excited about a Portuguese Wolves player who's played in the Champions League coming to Celtic than I would a Honduran winger from the Greek league. But
yeah,
we're not really going to find out about the true quality of these players until we see them in a Celtic shirt.
exactly. I mean, how many of us knew about Emilio Izagirre? I'm talking version 1, who was sensational until he broke his ankle, or even Virgil van Dijk, Victor Wanyama. Did we know about these players? I don't think so. So, I'm now of the view I'm quite relaxed about it, and I think that you've got to look at the recruitment record, certainly in the last couple of years, and focus on that and think, well, it's the same people, identifying these players. It's a different manager who's rubber stamping them, of course. But as I've said before, I'm a massive fan of Brendan Rodgers. I think he is a very good judge of a player and coach of a player. So I think yesterday's news was very positive. If we do a deal for Lewis Palma, then I trust that he has been through that same funnel when it comes to recruitment of quality, and I'm looking forward to hopefully some of these players falling into place. But I also want to talk about some of the positions. So there's the left winger, and quite a while back I said I wanted a goal. This was prior to us signing the two centre halves, because I wanted obviously a centre half, but I wanted a goalkeeper, a left back, a left winger. And I also have mentioned a centre forward, but I said that was kind of like on a wish list. That was a desirable rather than a necessity. And then in recent times, I've been watching the midfield. I'm thinking, do we need something in there? A wee bit more physicality in the midfield. So if we were to go out and get 3 or 4, and as Anthony Joseph has said, it will be a goalkeeper, left back, a left winger, centre forward, I think I'd be pretty happy with that. You disagree with the centre forward, and we'll come to that. But the left back, James, I was thinking about this yesterday. Brendan Rodgers was very coy the last time I watched him in a pre-match press conference, where obviously there's journalists going in there and they themselves want to get a headline. Of course they do. And sometimes their editors are maybe saying, right, I want you to ask this question. And I get the sense that sometimes they're kind of forced to ask a specific question, because by question 5, when it's already been asked in question 1, when a journalist is asking the same question again later on in the same conference, you're thinking, you've been told to ask that no matter what. And he was very coy about signings. But one signing, correct me if I'm wrong, and there's been others, but one signing that he has spoken about specifically during this transfer window is Kieran Tierney. Now, I'm not bringing him up to talk about the possibility of signing him. I'm bringing him up, James, because I'm going to ask the question, how does that affect Greg Taylor? Now, Greg Taylor has been, he's been praised to the hilt over the last couple of seasons because of his performances. But in the pre-season performances in the first 3 domestic games this season, there's been criticism going Greg's way, right? From Acsom, I've seen loads worse on social media. You try to do it as balanced as you possibly can. You start to look for solutions. Is Maeda no longer doing the defensive work? Is that affecting him? Can he play a traditional fullback? Is that affecting him? You look at all these different solutions to it. But one thing that just kind of dawned on me yesterday was Brendan Rodgers, the manager of Greg Taylor, has actively discussed a replacement for Greg Taylor.
You know what he said about Tierney? Is there exact quotes on it?
Yeah. Yeah, there's exact quotes where he is responding to a question about Kieran Tierney,
I think
and he doesn't write it off.
I think just based on how ludicrous the transfer rumour of Kieran Tierney coming back to Celtic actually is, at least in my eyes, I think Brendan Rodgers would have seen that as a sort of safe question to ask. It'd be like a journalist asking him, "Well, Lionel Messi's on the market, Brendan." I doubt Leo Abada's going to be quaking in his boots at the thought of Lionel Messi coming in and taking his spot. I think it wouldn't really be too much of a slight on Greg Taylor. More of a slight on Greg Taylor would have been the news that has come out today that Celtic could be in the market for a fullback. You know my thoughts on the fullback position. I think Taylor he can improve. He can improve. We know the quality player he is. We've seen that he can be a consistent player, and we can't forget Celtic signed him as a traditional fullback in the first place. They signed him from Kilmarnock to play just that role, but we swiftly discovered that he didn't really look like Celtic quality for the first sort of year and a bit. I'm still holding out hopes for Bernabe. I can't back it down now after I've backed him to the hills. I still think he should start on Saturday, in my opinion. But I don't think you can read too much into those Brendan Rodgers quotes.
Well, I don't expect us to sign Kieran Tierney. I don't, and I don't think we should. And I'll tell you why. Because it would be short-termism. And we had a habit of doing things like that in the loan market when Brendan was here first time round. And I don't think it fared us too well. Yes, we did get Edward out of it, but there was many others that we didn't. And, it was just a sticky plaster on a situation, James. And I don't like that for Celtic. I think we should have, and we do have, a much more medium to long-term strategy whereby you bring in a loan player to buy. And we did it with Maeda, we did it with Iwata, Carter Vickers and Jota, and it's worked, I think, largely to our advantage. So I was considering Greg Taylor. Obviously, like you say, that's been solidified by the fact that left back has been mentioned by both. Was it mentioned by McGowan? It was definitely mentioned by Anthony Joseph in relation to our specific targets. And we will be talking about it. You've already mentioned St Johnstone. There's a few things I want to talk about that you've written about on the blog, Acsom.net. Get it looked at. It's something that's very active at the moment. And James, a lot of the work on there is coming from James. We've also had contributions from Laura Bradburn, Kevin Graham, Kevin McCluskey, and myself over the last few weeks. It normally takes me about 3 or 4 weeks to write a single blog entry. So when it comes, it's normally about an obscure footballer from the 1980s that played a few games for Celtic, whereas James is writing about the here and now. And one of the things that I found pretty interesting that you were writing about is curveballs, and some curveballs that Rodgers could throw at this situation. I mean, I think it's safe to say that after the Kilmarnock game, James, he's under a wee bit of pressure as Brendan Rodgers going into this St Johnstone game. I don't have concerns about the game, I've got to say. I mean, I spoke about my concerns about the Kilmarnock game leading into it. I didn't try and hex the game. I just seen that there was an accumulation of circumstances that could work against us and transpire against us. I didn't expect us to be on the end of a few really bad refereeing decisions. That sounds bizarre, me saying that. Maybe I should have expected that as well. But we lost the game. I'm not expecting that. What curveballs, though, do you think could be thrown by Brendan Rodgers against St Johnstone?
Well, there's a couple of things that I noted down on my blog, Acsom.net. Be sure to check it out, everybody in the chat. Tomoki Iwata was a player that he could go one of two positions. The most likely would be at centre-back. However, I think out of all the centre-backs that are in Rodgers' real consideration, Gustav Lagerbielke is the only one that is fit currently. There's some social media rumours going about the length of Carter Vickers' injury, which will be worrying about people, but we'll wait for a bit more concrete stories to come out on Carter Vickers. But I feel like Tomoki Iwata could fill in at centre-back quite well. He was a solid option at centre-back last season, and there's no better game to take a risk by playing him at centre-back than against St Johnstone. They're probably, based on form, one of the worst teams in the league. They were shocking in the Viaplay Cup group stages. I think Stirling Albion beat them 4-0 at McDermott Park. So they're not exactly the most impressive of teams, so you can take some risks in this game. And I think what would be a similar dynamic to what you had with Carter Vickers and Starfield. Carter Vickers wasn't the tallest of centre-backs, which is why you have the tower and aerial threat next to him in Starfield. And in this situation, you would have the solid man-to-man defender and Iwata next to the towering aerial threat and Gustav Lagerbielke, 6'3". So I think Iwata, people say it's not his natural position as well, but he's played there for the majority of his career. He's played there far more. He's probably played more games, more than double the games at centre back than he has at defensive midfield. But you could even play him as a defensive midfielder as well. With Hatate out injured and Turnbull having that poor performance at Aberdeen, I think Brendan Rodgers will be spending a lot of time thinking about his midfield and what he could do with that. And what I would bring a bit more steel into the midfield. One of the problems has been that the midfield has been bypassed far too many times over the last few fixtures, and I don't think we're going to have our backs against the wall too many times against St Johnstone. But just in the case of that occasion arising, having Iwata as an option there would just help shore things up and help relieve the workload that's been on Cal McGregor in recent games as well, because he's been looking a bit stressed, he's been looking a bit hurried and hassled because of he's been man-marked, he's been targeted himself. Another thing Rodgers could do, I'll go away from Tomoki Iwata, games like this where we had a conversation about this the other day, where it seems like the club's in a bit of an injury crisis. Usually the onus would be on some of the younger players to step up, which is why I'm always so conscious about having a squad that's too bloated, because I always want the younger players in the Celtic Academy to get a chance, because what's the point in the Academy being there if no one's going to get an opportunity? When there's 3 or 4 centre-backs out and you don't give someone for the B team a chance, it's not really looking too good. And I think maybe someone like Vata coming in the attack could help provide a bit of a spark in the Celtic team. He has been sort of on the verges of coming into the first team for years now, but the opportunities just haven't came. People tend to sort of try and explain it by saying every single game at Celtic's must win. We can't afford to rotate. We can't afford to take chances. There is games where we can afford to take chances when you come up against the lesser teams in the Scottish Cup or some of the lesser teams in the league towards the tail end of the season. You can give younger players a chance then. And some of the best Celtic players, we covered it on one of the blogs that have popped up in the last sort of few years, have been because of injuries. Kieran Tierney got his first Celtic opportunity because of an injury, and Ronnie Dylan decided to take a chance on him because he impressed when he was training with the first team. So you could give a couple of the young players a chance in the team as well. And a final curveball that you could throw. I basically read out my article from start to finish, but you could switch back to the inverted fullbacks. As I mentioned, if you're not going to play Iwata and alongside McGregor in the midfield to provide that steal, then perhaps going back to the inverted fullback system could be the way to do that. There's been a lot of times where McGregor's assumed he's had more time on the ball than he's actually had when he's been on the ball in the midfield. And I think that's because he's instinctively thinking that Taylor and the right back are going to be there alongside him to provide the cover and to provide an option to pass to. That's why his passing has been a bit more slack. That's why he's been getting pickpocketed quite a bit more. So I don't know if Brendan Rodgers would do that. I think he wants to implement his own style, but he has been prone to do it in the first place. He's done it at Leicester. I think he did it at Liverpool as well on certain occasions. So it's not that far out of the realms of possibility for Brendan Rodgers to try and switch things up like that. But he'll be looking to implement his own style. The main worry would be that you could potentially break up the rhythm that the Celtic team is trying to form at the moment. But that's just a couple of things that you could go for. Iwata, perhaps giving a young player a chance as well.
Right, I'm going to go through them individually and hopefully we'll get some comments on it. Does Iwata come back into the Celtic side? It's true what you say, he's played more games in his career at centre-half than he has done in the midfield. I base my view on him simply by watching what he's done for Celtic, and he looked a far better midfielder than he did a defender, either in the centre or at right back, for me, for sure. So if he was to come back in, I would be playing him as a kind of number 6, a defensive midfield player, which would maybe give Callum a wee bit more license. In relation to Vata, I have said before, I think that there was a brilliant opportunity during the 9 in a row, whereby there was many games during that period, every season. And I know that there was a couple of tight seasons. There was a season, obviously, in Rory Dyler's second term where Aberdeen weren't a million miles off us. But there's so many games, and you think at home, particularly, James, where if you've got 2 or 3 or even 1 young player on the bench and you start to bleed them in these games. So they're not just getting a game on the last day of the season or 2 or 3 games before the end of the season. They're actually playing when we need to win games, but against opposition, James, that you would expect us to have enough quality to win the game. And there's a lot of them at home, let's be honest. And it doesn't have to happen at the kind of tail end of the campaign. So I think we failed massively when it came to developing the youth during that period. And what we've got now is a situation where there's been a few guys really come to the fore. We've loaned out 3 of them, actually, who had been in and around the first team squad over the pre-season, but one who hasn't gone out is Rocco Vata. There's been loads spoken about in relation to him, and obviously him changing agencies with regards to his, future and other teams who are interested in Torino, maybe taking him away and all this kind of stuff. What you need to show a player like that, I think, is that there is a pathway to the first team. And as a young 18-year-old who is blessed with huge potential at this stage of his career, he must look at the situation at Celtic and think, right, I can play right wing. We've lost Jota. The club have brought in 2 right wingers who, are young, early 20s from Australia and South Korea. They've brought these players in. So where does my future lie? Because I need to wait another 2 years, James, before I get a sniff by which time I'm 20. And a lot of these players we are bringing in have got 100 games under their belt plus, and they're in their early 20s. So why not develop our player from 17 to 21 rather than not developing them, losing them to any number of clubs, and then buying somebody else's player who has been developed by the Australian club or the South Korean. So you've sold me on Vata. I would have him in the squad 100%. I think he scored something like 6 goals in 5 games for the B team this season.
And I think the fact that someone like Ronnie Dyler at Club Bruges is interested in him as well. We know Ronnie Dyler had an eye for a young player. He tried to sign a certain Erling Haaland when he was Celtic manager. So Ronnie Dyler's got sort of a good eye for a young player.
Well, James, not only did you inform me or remind me of that, you also showed me Haaland's take on rap, and he done a rap song which is available to view on YouTube. Check it out, or don't.
And that's
actually.
Ronnie Dyler first song.
Yeah, if you have any respect for the player, don't check it out. Actually, it's terrible. But Jungle Lion, you're in, and I'm bringing you up because you're sunning yourself in Spain. Realistic, if these 3 or 4 players come in next week, it will take a few weeks to bed them in, but we need them for the 3rd. Absolutely, we do. And I think during today's show, we will go through each individual area of the park with a view to St Johnstone, but also with one eye on the game against Rangers on the 3rd of September, because we do have concerns, and a massive part of that is down to the injury concerns that we've got. What do you make of Iwata? What do you make of Vata? And finally, the other point that James made was a return to the inverted fullbacks. Well, my tuppence worth is this. I've heard both sides of the argument. I've heard people saying, well, if a manager takes the job, it's not because he wants to manage like the previous gaffer did. I think it's bigger than that, James. I think that what you do is you play to your strengths. You play to the strengths of the players. And when I'm looking at our fullbacks at the moment, I think the strength is in playing them in an inverted role. I think that over a 2-year period, we had mastered it. And it's now a case of being very obvious that Taylor, going back to a different role, is struggling to adapt to it. Tony Ralston, for me, I think he is a better traditional fullback than an inverted fullback, but he's not your first choice, is he? And we're obviously waiting on news of Alistair Johnston's return. Should be back this weekend. I even suggested, James, that he could maybe tuck in to the central defensive area as well.
Could Johnston? When he needs 90 minutes before the trip to Ibrox next weekend, 100%. You can't throw Alistair Johnston fresh from an injury and straight away for that Rangers game. You've got to give him time to get minutes in the legs before that fixture.
He did make his debut against them, did he? Did he not at Ibrox?
Yeah, but he'd been playing the World Cup. He's coming back from an injury. I think if Rodgers is going to experiment, this is going to be the last chance to do it, because after the Rangers game, you've got the Champions League coming up where things need to be settled. I think the fans are unsettled at the moment. There's no sort of doubt in that, but the way you try and put those doubts behind us is by putting up a top performance on Saturday. That's the philosophy at Celtic's always been to win. The mindset has always been to win. So when Celtic lose, there's always a massive uproar. And the best way to get rid of that uproar is by winning, and by winning well. So you've got to hope that Celtic will go out and sort of play to impress on Saturday.
James, the day that we are not unhappy and fuming and having an uproar at a Celtic defeat is the day that I start to get worried. I think there are loads of facets and elements to what makes up a Celtic state of mind. And what I mean there is actually the state of mind. And one of that is you've got a very fixed idea how Celtic should perform, how our players should conduct themselves, and the standards that we set as a football club. And that comes right down to the style, because there is an argument to suggest it's not just about winning, it's the manner in which you win as well, the style in which you win, entertaining the fans. That probably started with Jockstein's management, even though I know that there were loads of entertaining players prior to the 1960s at Celtic. But it is part of that state of mind that's ingrained in you. So when we get knocked out a cup or we lose a game, I totally expect a meltdown. If we didn't have a meltdown, if there was a shrug of the shoulders and it's all right, we're all Celtic fans, win, lose or draw. Yeah, we are. But it doesn't mean to say you've got to accept defeat lightly. You've got to look at the reasons for the defeat. And there are many, by the way. I know that Brendan Rodgers pointed out the quality of the pitch. There has been many, many debates raging on since the game around a few of the decisions made by the officials, James, and I'll come back to that in just a second, because there was a comment on yesterday's video about that. And then, of course, there's the individual decision making by the manager and the performances by the players. All of these things have to be discussed. But on this particular show, we do it in such a way where we're not just sitting here shouting about a player, criticising a player, throwing them under the bus. We're saying, right, this is happening. We can see it. Everybody can see this is happening. How do you solve that issue? So we're talking there about, do we revert back to inverted fullbacks? How will it benefit the fullbacks? Well, it will benefit Greg Taylor's performances. It will benefit the midfield, because it's obviously going to overload the midfield with bodies. It might benefit the performance of Callum McGregor as a result of that. And you know what? It might even benefit the wingers, who are a pivotal link within the fullback position. A lot of the ball is played from left back to left wing, clearly. So, yeah, I think it's valid to criticise, but in a balanced way. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and I don't think it always has to be deemed as being negative simply because, we got beat against Kilmarnock. Kilmarnock were, in relegation dogfight 2 seasons ago.
You've got to expect some sort of changes from Rodgers.
Absolutely.
Do you remember what was the idea I brainstormed the other day? Kyogo's dropping deep, play him behind Maeda, Lee hanging a pad on the wings. It was a full football manager thing. I don't think it'll change things up that much, but you'd have to expect some sort of changes. This weekend, 100%, because if there isn't any changes, the fans, the immediate reaction when the team comes out will be uproar again. How is he starting so-and-so? Why is he starting so-and-so?
No, you're right. And again, going into this game here against St Johnstone, it's a perfect opportunity, like you say, to try, if you're going to have to change anything, try it against St Johnstone, and then you're going in against Rangers, having seen 90 minutes of whatever it is you're changing. I'm going to bring on as many comments as possible because there's so many talking points, and we'll actually work our way through the team in terms of what we believe to be areas that are going to be improved on and strengthened, and also how we're going to line up against St Johnstone. What kind of changes would we make against St Johnstone as a visit Celtic Park? George, we went live at 12:30 today, my friend. We always do. Sometimes it's 12:30 and 40 seconds, but we always go for the 12:30. So I know you were really keen to get stuck in there into the comments section. It's great to see you. If you want to comment on the show, get yourself onto YouTube, subscribe to the channel, which is absolutely free of charge, even though you do have people like Andrew who want to throw in a few quid into the pot as well. And this is something that's an option for you if you want to, and obviously we see that happens, and we thank you dearly for giving us a contribution to the Acsom cause. Obviously, to go out every single day and run the shows and the blogs and everything else is something that takes up a lot of our time, but we love every single moment of it. Liam Devine, we need a goalkeeper, we need other players and other positions and blah blah, but when I say need, and that's in capitals for those listening later on the audio service. I mean, need a goalkeeper. I think Liam wants us to sign a goalie. And it's interesting, James, that is one of the positions that have been identified over the last 24 hours that we are in the market for. If we do bring one in, though, would you be looking to shell out or move on, rather, Siegrist and or Bain?
Do you think Joe Hart would stay around as a backup? I remember Joe Hart saying that his first club was Shrewsbury. So I think in Joe Hart's ideal world, he'd love to end his career at Shrewsbury. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know Joe Hart's mindset, but I know his love for that football club. So I don't think Joe Hart would settle for being backup. I think he'd go to Shrewsbury and play out the rest of his career there. So I think you would keep Siegrist as backup. I would have Scott Bain nowhere near the starting berth for me anyway. I don't know how much you would spend on a goalkeeper for Celtic. Because goalkeepers are naturally quite cheap anyway. You can sort of pick them up for around £5-6 million, which is a lot for Celtic. I mean, Livakovic, who was a World Cup quality goalkeeper, he was going for about £9-10 million. I would have loved Celtic to sign him. But my thinking is it too late in the window now to try and go out and get a goalkeeper? Because you only get one goalkeeper in the park, and all the big teams will have swept up all the good goalkeepers that are on the market already. So it's going to be hard for Celtic to try and find a quality goalkeeper. But if there is one available on the market, there's no doubt that Celtic should go out and sign one.
Do you think, just what you're saying there about Joe Hart, because I've been saying all season consistently this season on Acsom that if I sign any player, I want the player that I bring in to either be an upgrade on what I've already got or certainly someone who is going to be challenging for the jersey. And I think one of the biggest issues that we've had is we bought in a goalkeeper this time last season who was meant to be challenging our current goalie. We brought in a left back who was meant to be challenging Greg Taylor. And we brought in, during the season, a centre-half who was meant to be challenging that partnership of Carter Vickers and Starfelt. And I think it's safe to say, even though you haven't given up on Bernabe yet, that all those players, Kobayashi, Bernabe and Siegrist, have not worked out so far. Obviously, they're all still at the club. And I think if we do sign a goalie, there's a question around another one of these changes that have been made, and that is how the goalkeeper uses the ball at his feet. So it looks to me, watching the games, is that even up to the Ross County game, it was a Joe Hart of old. And by the way, I'm a massive fan of Joe Hart. I really am. I just think that he's been playing in a style under Postecoglou that finished his Man City career, and he's adapted as much as he can adapt. I don't think he can get any better with the ball at his feet, James. What we see is what we're always going to get from Joe Hart. So if you continually play that style of game, there are going to be moments over a season where he loses the ball, where he passes the ball and we lose possession, or you can basically just say, that was your fault, Joe. And that's happened a few times, obviously. So I think Brendan Rodgers has quickly realised that. And he's also realised that Joe Hart is the best option in goals for Celtic from all the goalies that we have. So what he's done is he's slightly changed the way that we use the ball from the back. And we've spoken about that. It's about clearing the ball. I've never seen so many clearances in the last 2 years as I have done in the last two games, whereby the ball is actually getting cleared from the danger area. We simply didn't do that for 2 seasons. How do we change? If we do bring in a goalie, and he's obviously there to be challenging for the number 1 jersey, James, do we also change the style back to more of a focus on the goalie with the ball at his feet?
I think you've got to try and find a goalkeeper who's competent with the ball at his feet. I don't think, when you're looking at signing a goalkeeper, I don't think it needs to be a trade-off. You don't need to trade off being good with the ball at his feet for a phenomenal shot stopper. You don't need to trade off being good with the ball at his feet and being terrible with trying to be a shot stopper. If you could try to find a balance like what we had with Fraser Forster, I mean, when we went out to sign Barkas, we went out to sign with the intention of having a goalkeeper who's good with the ball at his feet. And look where that got us. Now, we've signed Joe Hart to be a shot stopper. He's a good shot stopper, but horrendous with the ball at his feet. If you can find someone who's just all right with the ball at his feet, I don't think there's going to be too much of an emphasis on that anyway in this Rodgers system, at least as much as what there was under Ange. But someone, just a really good shot stopper, I think, is the main importance, especially if for European competitions, because Celtic, the amount of shots on goal that we're going to be facing is going to be unprecedented. The golfing quality between the teams that we're going to be facing is going to be massive. So naturally, we're going to be on the back foot time and time and time again. So you need, like a Fraser Forster, a goalkeeper who can make a big sort of game-winning save, a save that can keep you in a match, something like that. I don't think there's going to be too much of an emphasis on playing with the ball at the feet under Brendan Rodgers, though.
Right. I mean, you mentioned earlier on about this leaked list, James, right? And I've actually pulled up the Acsom article on it. It was called "Whatever Happened to the Leaked Document 12." So there was a dozen players on it. Reece James was on it. I think that was the guy you mentioned.
Yeah, I remember Reece
James. Tommy Smith. A Danish international called Zanka Fiayo Tamori was on it.
Fiayo Tamori, he plays for AC Milan now.
All right, he's done all right. Romain,
one of the best centre backs on the planet.
Well, let me have a look. At this time, he was 22 years of age. Yep, that's the boy. Romain Perrault was on it as well. He was shortlisted as a backup left back.
Last season.
Mm-hmm. And at that point, we still had Kieran Tierney, of course, and we had reinforcements who arrived in Bolingoli. Remember him and Greg Taylor? Yeah, Joe Aribo was on it, like you said before. He was at Charlton at the time. Raheem Harper was a 19-year-old. And Scott McTominay, whose name was linked with Celtic this pre-season as well. No, he wasn't. It wasn't actually on this list, but you know who was? Brandon Barker. Yep. Neil Maupay and Lise Mousset. Yeah. So a mixed bag. I think it's safe to say, James, a mixed bag. And how often would we be able to look at a shortlist and say, wow, I wish we'd signed him, and thank God we'd ever signed that one. Andrew, you've came in, as I said earlier, we should use League Cup campaigns as a reward for our best 3 or 4 youth players, blend them with the first team and let them have a crack at silverware. I think we have played sometimes in the past, shadow squads, I might even want to call it. And when you look at the team that was playing Morton, for example, and they beat us 1-0, yeah, I know that Van Dijk and that was playing, but you know, there was a few introductions, if you like, as well. So I think there's got to be a balance. You've got to introduce young players in a situation where it's competitive enough, but at the same time, you're maybe playing a game that you're thinking to yourself, I can confidently give the young player a half hour here if and when we wrap the game up. I think most of us are quite happy, James. We're right back at the moment. I don't think there is an issue with that, but I'm going to ask you, because obviously we're talking about St Johnstone as well. Would you, if he's fit to play, would you just bring Johnstone right back in at right back?
Yeah, absolutely. He'll be starting consistently probably over the course of the season, barring any sort of major injuries. So I think Alistair Johnstone, if he's fit, he's got to play. That's sort of as simple as that. I think that there'll still be opportunities for Anthony Ralston, though. Absolutely. He needs game time to be at his best, whatever that is. He'll probably get half an hour at the end of this St Johnstone game, or maybe even 40 minutes. They'll give Alistair Johnstone the time, though, from the start, though.
Right. And I think that gives us a boost, Johnstone coming in. Left back, you've not written off Bernabe. I guess we're going into the St Johnstone game and we're not really expecting Brendan to revert back to inverted fullbacks, although you've said it's an option. Are you actually expecting him to do it? Do you think he'll do it?
Just like me suggesting Kyogo playing behind Maeda with Yang and Abada, it's one of 100 million thoughts we've brainstormed after a Celtic defeat, which we can all admit we all do.
Well, you know this, right? It is a Celtic defeat, but if it was a Celtic defeat in a run of games where we've been excellent and everything seems to be working, I'm less concerned. I hate getting beat, no matter what. I hate getting beat, but I would be less concerned. I don't think we've seen the performances against Ross County and Aberdeen prior to the defeat, which is probably why, James, we're talking about all these permutations of things that could be solutions. And obviously Brendan Rodgers and his management and coaching team will be doing exactly that behind the scenes as well. But at left back, we might be surprised here. Are you going to reintroduce Bernabe? Would you bring in Bernabe for a game like this? You would?
Yeah, I would. I think, as I've mentioned, how poor St Johnstone are. So if they do all of a sudden come out and beat us on Saturday, I will have the biggest egg on my face. But I think if you're going to take a chance, take a chance. Greg Taylor's been poor for a while now. And Bernabe was coming on a game, don't forget, in pre-season before he decided to sleep in and miss his alarm. And Brendan Rodgers has spoke highly of him in some of his media conferences. So, yeah, I'd give Bernabe a chance.
Okay, there you go. There's the first change. Second, actually. And when you look then at the central defensive partnership, this is one of the big things. We talk about changes. Some of them have been implemented by Brendan Rodgers very much through choice. And other times he's been faced with a situation or dilemma that he's basically just had to deal with, James. And one of those issues has been the central defensive partnership, which had been so successful for us over a period of 2 years, and Carl Starfelt and Carter Vickers being broken up. Now, I know that we've still got Carter Vickers, but he's now injured. So you're taking one of the best elements, one of the strongest elements of that team, the whole structure of the team, and it's been removed. And we're basically now having to deal with that. Brendan Rodgers is having to deal with that. How's he dealt with it? Well, he's brought in 2 new centre-halves. But in the meantime, as I said, Carter Vickers is injured, as is Stephen Welsh. So we've now got a situation, as is Mike Nowrowski. So we've now got a situation where we have 3 centre-half options. And the first one is your big pal, Gustav Lagerbielke, who you met last week. And we've also got Liam Scales, who played a few games during the pre-season, and I thought he was quite impressive, actually, during pre-season. Another one, of course, we've already mentioned is Tomoki Iwata, who I fancy more as a midfield player, but obviously has played a lot more games at centre-half. Give me your central defensive partnership and your rationale behind it as well, James.
My centre defensive partnership, I feel like I sort of backed myself up earlier on this year. I'd be going Lagerbielke and Tomoki Iwata. That would just based on the fact that I don't really want to play Liam Scales or I think Yuki Kobayashi's still injured. But I think the team we see on Saturday will be the closest thing to what team we'll send out at Ibrox on September 3rd. And if I'm thinking of what team I would send out there, unless Cameron Carter-Vickers or Mike Nowrowski is back from injury, there's got to be Lagerbielke and Tomoki Iwata for me.
I like your thinking, because you're thinking around Iwata's stature physically, the fact that, he can play with the ball at his feet.
It's a similar dynamic to what made the centre-back partnership so successful and so dominant for, that's what, two and a half years.
I like it. I'm going to have to change, now that we've got to the end of the defence, I'm going to have to change and give you what I'm thinking at the moment. The reason I wouldn't play Iwata at centre-half is because I'm playing him in the midfield, so we'll come to that in a wee second. But my team that I would play against St Johnstone with Rangers, obviously in view, would be Joe Hart. Now, with regards to the right-back, James, and I'll tell you why I'm thinking this, I want just as much experience as I possibly can, because whatever you're going to be playing at centre-half is going to be an unknown partnership. I'm going to stick with Greg Taylor at left back. I'm going to play with Tony Ralston at right back. And the central...
Well. No, but not after that. Alistair Johnson, sorry. I got Alistair Johnson right back.
You've got Alistair Johnson, and I'm going to play... My 2 centre-halves are going to be Lagerbielke. And, if it wasn't Rangers coming up, I would say Scales. I would give Scales a game against St Johnstone domestically. I would have a look at him. I know that you watched him play for Aberdeen in person last season. You weren't impressed, and it would actually give you the fear. It would give you the fear if he lined up against Rangers and in the Champions League. But my thinking is Alistair Johnson can play centre-half. Now, I know you're against throwing him in there for his first game back, but I just think play him centre-half alongside Lagerbielke. He's played there in his career, very much like Iwata. He has played in that position. And I just think that Hart with Tony Ralston, Greg Taylor, Lagerbielke and Johnson is how I would set that up. Some people might be concerned at the shape of that. When you move in, obviously, to the midfield positions, and that's not a position that has been quoted as being one that we're going to strengthen, James. How do you line up this weekend? I know that you've had concerns about Carlin McGregor, the captain. I think there's mitigating circumstances around it, which has highlighted his loss of form. But he plays, right? And who plays alongside him? What do you think?
See, the midfield is, I mentioned it'll be where most of the thought from Brendan Rodgers will be going into. There's sort of stuff to think about all over the park, just based on the amount of injuries we actually have. And you're looking a bit thin without Rio Hatate there as far as sort of real known quality goes. Because right now, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking the same midfield that struggled against Kilmarnock last week, without being McGregor, Holm, and O'Reilly. But if you're looking at the alternative options you have there, do you put in David Turnbull? He's not going to provide what was missing against Kilmarnock. Sorry, do you throw in Kwon? We've not really seen much of him apart from a shaky game in James Forrest's testimonial, which I don't know if that's the best sort of way to judge a player's talent. So perhaps Kwon could come in for a game, but I think it would probably be. I'll give David Turnbull a start. He's not really known for having good games against Rangers. That's never been his sort of real forte. I don't think I can think of a good match he's had against Rangers. He has scored against them though. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
But St Johnstone aren't really going to offer as much. They are going to set off as much like what I thought Kilmarnock would do in the first place. They'd be really compact, they would sit back quite a lot. So you would need a player like Turnbull to break. And then he could probably have a similar game to what he had against Ross County. But I don't know if Turnbull's the man to play against Rangers. And if you're looking at this game with the game against Rangers in mind on September the 3rd, then perhaps Odin Holm starts. I can't really nail down one midfield. I think I'll go Holm, McGregor, O'Reilly. I've made my mind up.
Okay, so you've switched a wee bit there for Turnbull to Holm, but I get that. I know that you're a big fan of Odin Thiago Holm. I'm going to bring up some of the comments because obviously, as always, there are plenty of people disagreeing with us, which is absolutely, that's expected and welcomed. Scales must be given a chance, says Powerman 1988. I think that I said there that I probably would have given him this game, James, if it wasn't Rangers just round the corner, because I think that, like you say, this is a last chance to get it right before we go into the Glasgow derby. So that's my reasons for not playing Scales. Paul Andrew Martin, I'd play Ralston at centre-back before AJ, as he's better in the air. That's your take on it. And AJ SC Tech, agree with JP. Scales in this Saturday at left centre-back and a Wata in defensive mid, release Callum to the 8 role makes sense. Is AJ fit? Well, he's training, and there's a suggestion that he will be involved.
Last Friday, so you'd hope a week and a day of training, they would surely be fit.
You would hope so, absolutely. Gerard Hackett, Scales must start, deserves his opportunity. And Joseph McGonigal, thank you for your contribution as well. Always great to see your name popping up there. Awata at centre back. No, says Pete McGee. Based
Pete,
on.
The only player who struggled against Pete was Curtis Main, and if my mind serves me correctly, I think Curtis Main isn't in the league anymore. So
that's true. Where is he? Where is he now?
I think he's went back to England.
Yeah, wouldn't surprise me. No, that was a strange game, that Curtis Main bullying Awata.
Who said that I played alongside in that game? Was it Carl Starfelt?
I'd need to go back and check.
We had Awata and Ralston both on the right-hand side. And then Ralston was still in poor form at this point. They were both getting absolutely flattened off Curtis Main.
Yep, ragdolled, I think is the term. We've also got Marquis.
Christopher Julian and Moritz Jens the same treatment over a few games. So Curtis Main just doesn't like Celtic defenders.
He scored 2 that day. Could have scored 4. Mark E. Ralston, Lager, Scales, and Taylor is how you would go for it. And opinionated Glaswegian OG, overreactions all round, says opinionated Glaswegian OG. Is that original gangster OG? I think it is, isn't it? Let us know in the comments field. We can afford 3 £10 million players to make an impact in Europe, says Jerry D. Imagine the impact. Everyone's up for it then. Are we serious about Europe? I have long suggested that I would prefer less players of a higher calibre. I've said it time and time again. And I think that can be supplemented by bringing in 1 or 2 young prospects who you can nurture within the club, James. And I think we've done that particularly well over the years. But we've never really gone into a European campaign with the 3 or 4 big signings. I think last pre-season was maybe the closest we came when we went out there and we signed Carter Vickers and Jota, in the same window, and it was massive. That was a massive investment for Celtic. I would rather sign 4 players of that ilk than 10 players, because it looks as though we're going to have 10 players in who would maybe cost you the same as the 4. And I get that you've got to basically have a higher ratio of successes that way, because if you're going to have that investment, it's got to work. We've been stung by Ayeti and Barkas. I think that we're all aware of that, and it's always a cautionary tale, that throwing the money doesn't always give you the quality. But I think mainly when we spend big money, we do get quality. Even with regards to Julien, the way his career ended, I think has kind of muddied the waters a wee bit.
Tell me this. I was probably the biggest Christopher Julian fan on Acsom.
Yeah, he was a great signing. I mean, when you look at the career that he had prior to colliding against that post against Dundee United, and it's easy, obviously, because you've got the primacy of recency. Yeah,
step up. Lazio, both legs. Games against Rangers. I remember the
cup final.
First Ibrox in that season, and was the game I was thinking in particular. I think it might have been Julian's first or second game. He was absolute colossus. I think he got man of the match that day. Every single high ball that was coming in, he was always up there. And then the final, as you mentioned, we saw the greatest knee slide of all time.
The worst thing about his performances was that celebration where he pretended that he was ripping open his Superman top, his Clark Kent suit to reveal Superman underneath. I wasn't a big fan of that, but you know what? I'm picking holes here. Brian Welsh informs us that Curtis Main is now playing in India.
I knew he'd left. He didn't think he's gone that far away, though.
Owen Coyle's over there. He's managing over there as well. Well, at least Curtis Main can't. Yeah, I'd need to double check that actually. But yeah, he has returned to a team that he managed previously. Paul Andrew Martin, you throw somebody around like a wet tracksuit. Yes, absolutely. That's what Curtin Main used to do with us. And that's the midfield then of James McKenzie. What do you make of that? My midfield, I don't know why there's criticism around O'Reilly. I think he started off really strong. No one was great against Kilmarnock. You gave your ratings on the site. No one was great, James, but I think that O'Reilly has started the season off really well, and he is an absolute certainty to start against St Johnstone. Callum McGregor, I'm not being overly critical. He's just not started the season off, but I think it's due to other factors rather than just his own form. And I think that we've seen Callum playing worse for Celtic over the years, and he's always come through it, and I trust that he will. It's not like he's over the hill. He's only 30. And I would play Wata. I think that with a new central defensive partnership, you need somebody to protect them in many, many ways. And I think also it frees up McGregor a wee bit more. Let him play a wee bit more advanced. We don't need a double pivot in domestic games, generally speaking. So that would be my midfield. And your top three then, who are you playing left wing, right wing, and through the middle, James?
Left wing, right wing, through the middle. Well, Kyogo, Maeda, and the big call for me is between Yang and Abada. I think I'll stick with Abada for now because, again, with the Rangers game in mind, Leo Abada's always going to get you a goal against Rangers. It's like destiny, almost. He always performs well in those games, and we'll hopefully see him raise the performance levels a bit. I'd emphasised how important he would be this season, and he's not really raised his game that much. He's sort of just been steady over the course of the season, which, in the absence of Jota, he's the sort of player that you need to be stepping up in the sort of front three. So I'd play Abada, but I'd be wanting a better performance.
Again, from the beginning of the season, I think the three players that I highlighted that could really take it to another level, I think they've got it in them, were Hatate, Abada and O'Reilly. That's the three that I reckon could really step up for Celtic. Hatate, as well as the injury problems, is in negotiations with Celtic to sign a new contract. Abada apparently is also in negotiations with the club, and O'Reilly seems quite settled, even though there has been interest over the piece for all three players. I think that Abada needs to step up, and as impressed as I have been with Yang, I'm not about to drop somebody like Abada, particularly with his record against Rangers. I do like him against Rangers. So I'm going to stick with that. People might say I'm playing it safe, but it is Maeda, Abada, and
Would you more likely to drop Abada and Maeda out of the two wingers? Because a lot of the comments are saying they would want Yang to come in, but I don't really see which one of the wingers I would drop from.
I think over the three games, we've got used to looking at some of the attributes that Maeda has in his game and what he brings to Celtic. And then it's easy to say, well, you can't drop him because of what he does. But actually, when you look at the performances of Maeda against Abada, I'd probably veer towards Abada. And I know that he didn't play well against Kelly, but not many of us did. I think if I was going to drop a winger at the moment, it would be Maeda, but I've got concerns about Taylor behind him. If you're going to be playing somebody else in front of Taylor, it might affect him a wee bit, and he's not playing well. So there's loads of moving parts to that. But yeah, I want to see more of Yang. Martin is asking why we're not giving stick to the captain. Well, I think the thing is, Martin, and you would actually drop him. I wouldn't. I think that's one of the things that you've got to be very careful of when you're in not a crisis, but you're in an injury crisis and you're in a bit of a sticky patch of form as a team, not just as a player. One of the worst things you can do is drop your captain, because I just think it looks like panic stations. It just looks like panic stations. And what you want is you want your captain to be your manager on the park. He's the guy that, Brendan went and met him for lunch in Mallorca, didn't he? Prior to actually accepting the Celtic job. He trusts him so highly. And I think we're going to get it through this period together with Callum McGregor. I certainly would not be dropping him. James Floyd released the bull against Rangers, 30-yarder. I just felt that Brendan was quite non-committal after Turnbull's good performance. You remember he got the man of the match first day of the season. I never heard Rodgers saying, that's why I want to keep this player. He just said, well, he knows what I need. If he wants to play Matt O'Reilly. He got the praise from Matt O'Reilly. Yeah, he did. And James Love cannot be a Wata Ibrox. Well, I get what you mean in a central defensive perspective, but I think he's played well against Rangers in midfield.
Yeah, I was going to say, why not? Why not?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. By the way, it will be interesting to see that team line once it is revealed 1 hour before kickoff. We'll obviously be covering the game as we always do. We're playing St Johnstone and we're hoping to get back into winning ways. We've obviously won 100% of our league games, and long may that continue. 3 or 4 players coming in before the window shuts. Let's hope that they do, and we will cover it all here on a Celtic State of Mind. Thanks everybody for getting involved. 1,200 strong at one point there on a Thursday afternoon. JP Mason is normally sitting where James is, figuratively speaking, that is, not actually in the studio, but he is doing his full-time job in the music world, and I hope he's enjoying himself doing that today. And we'll welcome him back with open arms when he's back, able to speak about Celtic, as I know he loves to do that as well. Thanks everybody for getting involved. If you want to vote for Acsom actually in this year's awards, we would more than happily go down to Liverpool, James and I, and anybody else in the Acsom team who can get a night off to pick up an award. If you want to vote for us, then all the details are underneath this video. You can click on it, vote for Acsom in 4 different categories, and we would more than happy bring up a quadruple if enough of you vote for us. So thanks very much for all your support, and thank you to James Mackenzie for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.